photo by Kevin C. Cox. Getty ImagesWhen Tennessee football hired Jeremy Pruitt as head coach at the end of 2016, it was the second hire of a former Saban assistant the Vols had made this decade. The first was Derek Dooley, who got blown out by the Alabama Crimson Tide 3 years in a row as the Vols head coach. Ironically, before Dooley, the Vols hired a future Saban assistant in Lane Kiffin, which obviously didn't work out. Anyway, with the hire came lots of demeaning quotes. Finebaum was one who pushed the narrative. Everybody said that Pruitt is a good hire for the Vols but added they'll just have to accept losing to Alabama. After all, Saban is 12-0 against his former assistants and has dominated them. But when you break things down, that's a total myth. First off, as we mentioned, Tennessee football is part of those 12 games in a big way with the Dooley years. And each assistant actually has too small a sample size against Saban, which is why this is something not to worry about as much. Simply put, this is a narrative pushed out there without any other layer of facts. But when you get into the weeds of the details, that history has nothing to do with whether or not Pruitt will be able to succeed against Saban. On the contrary, he has the best chance to actually break the curse since he's about to be facing Saban every year. And if he does his job well, maybe Saban will be the one fearing him when the near future arrives. So let's break down why this narrative makes no sense. These are the 4 reasons Tennessee football fans should not worry about Saban's record against his former assistants when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt. Page 2 photo by Kevin C. Cox. Getty ImagesWhen. Nick Saban has 7 wins against former assistants who were eventually fired. Tennessee football comes into play with this first reason. Of Nick Saban's 12 wins against his former assistant coaches, more than half of them came against coaches who were eventually fired. What does that say? It says that Saban wasn't unique in beating up on them. He got 2 wins against Will Muschamp while he was with the Florida Gators. One was Muschamp's first year, when he was still establishing his style. The other was Muschamp's final year, a year in which the wheels had already come off the program. 2 more came against a new Florida Gators coach in Jim McElwain. McElwain is an incompetent coach that Florida fired in 3 years who simply won the SEC East by default. The other 3 came against Derek Dooley, the losingest coach in Tennessee football history. Dooley was with the Vols for 3 years, and in addition to being a very questionable coach already, he had a very short stick to fight in the SEC. He also got swept by Mark Richt, Steve Spurrier and Muschamp himself. So Saban wasn't unique. Simply put, beating all of these former assistants, who turned out to be not great head coaches anyway, is not an impressive feat for Saban. If Jeremy Pruitt works out with the Vols, he would not fit the mold of any of these players. Page 3 photo by Tom Pennington, Getty Images 2. 3 of Nick Saban's wins were against lesser programs, so 7 of Saban's wins are against coaches at programs that fired them. 3 more, getting us to 10 of his 12, were against the leaders of lesser programs. One of them, notably, was also against Jim McElwain. McElwain was fired by the Florida Gators, but he did succeed with the Colorado State Rams. And Colorado State lost to the Alabama Crimson Tide once under him. Nobody would ever say CSU was on Alabama's level as a program. The other one is the Michigan State Spartans and Mark D'Antonio. D'Antonio is a great coach, but Michigan State was never on Alabama's level as a program and still isn't. They compete in the Big Ten and for spots in the college football playoff only because of D'Antonio's great coaching, and he is indeed a great coach. But against a guy like Saban who loads his rosters at Alabama with five-star talent, which he can do, D'Antonio has no chance. You can't beat Saban doing his style without having his caliber of players. There's no chance that D'Antonio will ever get those, so his 2010 Capital One Bowl blowout loss to Alabama and his 2015 college football playoff loss to Alabama make sense. Despite being a lesser program at this current stage, Tennessee football in the right situation can easily secure elite athletes. That's what makes them different under Jeremy Pruitt. Page 4. Use your arrows to browse a photo by Scott Cunningham, Getty Images 3. In Nick Saban's 2 other wins, Jeremy Pruitt was behind it. Okay, so we've got 10 of his 12 wins now. That all would have been expected. That means he had 2 wins against elite programs with coaches successful enough to beat anybody. The first was the opener of last year against the Florida State Seminoles and Jimbo Fisher. Billed as the game of the century, Saban and Fisher were in for a collision course. Well, it turned into an ugly 24-7 victory in Alabama's favor that ended with Florida State losing its quarterback. Know who was behind this win? Tennessee football head coach Jeremy Pruitt. That's right, Pruitt's dominating unit as Alabama's defensive coordinator secured this win for the Tide. But that wasn't the only one. At the end of last season, Saban got his second win against a former assistant. It was against Kirby Smart. And again, Pruitt was the reason for the win. His defense kept Alabama afloat as the offense struggled under Jalen Hurts in the first half. After the quarterback switch, they gave up only one big play the rest of the game. Pruitt was behind that national title win, so Vols fans shouldn't worry about those 2 games against assistants. We should chalk those wins up to Pruitt more than anybody else. Use your arrows to browse.